Welcome to the Open to Hope Show in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my friend and co-host, Alan Pedersen. Hi, Alan.
How are you, Heidi?
Good. Good to have you co-hosting today.
Happy to be here today. I love working with Open to Hope. It means a lot because we're all about hope. And today's show, we have two really amazing guests that struggle to find hope, that their loss is one that many people wonder, will you ever find hope again? That's what I love about doing these programs, is we find those people and we find those stories and we put them out there for the world to hear and listen to so people can see what hope looks like. So I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely.
And to co-host with you once again.
I am too, and Alan, you've co-hosted a lot of our shows, and I know that you go around the country and bring hope to people because you are the president of the Angels of the USA Tour. And can you tell us a little bit about that before we start talking to our guests?
Yeah, the Angels Across the USA Tour, I speak and play. I'm a singer-songwriter. I've written a lot of music about finding hope again through loss, and so I go out and do a combination of speaking and singing, and I focus and specialize in working with grief organizations that are reaching out to people who frankly wonder if they'll ever have hope or if they'll ever have a life again. I've been very blessed in my life that I had good grief support and was able to find my way through grief after my 18-year-old daughter Ashley died in 2001, and I just tried to give back what was given to me and share hope through music. And so I travel around the country in a van. I go to all these little cities and big groups and small groups and try to share my message of hope. So I'm happy to be here with you today because you and I work together well, and we both have kind of that same foundational belief that it's all about hope. Absolutely,
and that's why we call the organization Open to Hope, because we didn't want to tell everybody out there to be hopeful. We wanted to say be open to the idea that someday you're going to find hope.
Exactly.
Like Alan and I have, and our guests. So like you said, we have a show that is very incredible because these are two moms that have found hope again, and they found hope and survived and thrived after the murder of their sons. So they will tell us how they've done that and give you tips and tools on how to eventually find hope again after a loss. We've got Mary Jane Cronin and Dr. Sue Hamby here with us today. And Mary Jane's son Jeremy was murdered when he was a teenager. She's written 5 books, and she's written the book called November Morning. And then Dr. Sue Hamby has co-authored 2 books and written a book called Turning Your Stars into Scars. And she lost her son, Russ, and he was also murdered. So they're gonna talk to us today about going through November Morning and then how they did turn their stars into scars. And I'm excited to have them on today.
I am too. I think we're gonna learn a lot from them, and hopefully there's gonna be somebody out there who will hear what they say and maybe find that little nugget of hope that they need. So I'm excited to get started with our guests.
Absolutely. So welcome, Mary Jane and Sue.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So Mary Jane, why don't we start with you and you can tell us a little bit about your story.
Jeremy was 16 years old, my second child. And he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, back when he was 16, he thought he was a daredevil.
Right.
Anything would be fine. And he was murdered by a young boy.
Wow.
This was something that traumatized me as well as my family.
Right.
We live in a town that was not known for crime. So it was something that I really struggled with dealing with this happening.
Right.
And thinking, what am I going to do?
Wow, yeah, like you said, it's frightening to think, okay, how does this happen? And it's normal for teenagers, and you know, to think, okay, we're invincible, and you know, you just don't ever expect something like that to happen.
No.
Right.
So Sue, what about you? What is your story?
Okay, my son Russ was 50, and he worked with me. I owned a business, a natural food store. And unfortunately, he was murdered on a home invasion.
Wow.
And he didn't come to work that day, and so I went out thinking he was sick.
Right.
And unfortunately, I found him murdered. And it was a very traumatic experience. It was just hard to describe. It sent me into a, I felt like when I saw him murdered, I was like thrown into a pit of darkness. And I just was so, well, I didn't know what to do. I cried out to the Lord because I was by myself, and I thought, you know, is a person still in the house?
Yeah, that's scary.
And but I was able to give scripture, and God just gave me light to get out of that darkness. And since then, it's transformed my life. It's changed my priorities, and I think it's so important that people have hope. I see people all the time. I work with homeless, and they have no hope. And so, you know, I think it's wonderful to inspire people and encourage people and let them know that there is hope is possible after losing, and Russ was my only child. So, but there's still hope.
Right, and I'm just wondering for both of you, I mean, I imagine you were in these very dark places for quite a while, I would think, before you were able to see glimmers of hope again, and what, you know, what that looked like.
Jeremy was my second of 4 sons. And my other boys were with him at the time.
Wow.
I was not present, as Sue mentioned, when her son was killed, but my boys were.
Wow.
And I became paranoid that something would happen to them.
I bet.
I wouldn't leave the house at night. I wouldn't let them go places that they didn't want to. This was the time when people started having cell phones. And I was like, you can't call me from a cell phone because I won't know where you are.
Right.
And that panic stayed with me for a long time.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think about murder, and I think, you know, we want to believe that the world is a safe, predictable place. But now, like you said, your world at that point was no longer a safe, predictable place.
No, and I think that a lot of times when a murder is committed, it is an impulse. My person that killed Jeremy was found, was tried, was convicted, and did time. I thought that would make it easier for me if I knew why, if I knew who, but it didn't. I still didn't have my son.
Right.
I think, you know, when I work a lot with families who've, you know, their loved one or their child or their sibling was murdered, and one of the things that I hear from them commonly, and maybe you could both comment on this, is that initially our impulse is justice. We certainly want to seek justice, and you know, and even whether it's murder or a medical error. But the confusion of, you know, kind of almost having to put grief over here because you couldn't focus on the two things at the same time. Can both of you talk about your experience with seeking justice and how that affected your grief journey and how you juggled
Well, for me, seeking justice, I felt they've never found out who murdered my son. And I felt as his mother, it was my responsibility to find out. And it was, when you have a murder, it's much different because it becomes a complicated grief.
Yes.
You have to handle the media, which are personally pretty bad, and you have to deal with the police. And it was very complicated. And I still, you know, it's been 5 years, and they haven't really done anything to find them. And I still feel like, you know, at times I felt like it's my responsibility to find out who did that. And I think that was one thing, is trying to let go of that and realizing that it wasn't my responsibility. But it made it complicated.
Before I can do, I want to just to follow up on that, because I think about having lost a daughter in a car accident, and I think of just all of the things in the early initial part that I
all the questions
had to do. I mean, from the funeral to the whatever, and when I think of a case, in most murder cases are, you know, they're in the media, so they're public, and now you're dealing with, you know, just curiosity seekers, and then police and news and all that. So I mean, as you look back through it, was there any secret you could share with somebody? Or
well, I had a bitterness. I'll be honest with you. I was very bitter. At first with the police, I was not held out there. They told me I couldn't leave until he was pronounced dead, so I had to stay out there 3 hours by myself on the back porch. And I heard the police laughing. And they're in there laughing over something. I'm sure they weren't laughing over his death. But I became bitter. And then I became bitter also over the fact that they weren't doing anything. And the media, when you talk about it, I had someone call me from the television station the day after saying, do you know what kind of gun it was that killed your son?
Wow.
And my response was, I couldn't believe they asked me that.
Right.
And I said, if your child, do you have children? He said, yes, a 3-year-old. And I said, if he was run over by a car, would you care if it was a Chevy or a Ford?
That's a good point. Doesn't matter.
And,
yeah.
And the other thing, the bitterness, I had to overcome that bitterness and had to overcome the fact that it was so important to me, but it wasn't real important to them. And I even at one point had a person who was homeless come up and tell me she knew who murdered my son.
Wow.
Took her to the police station, and the police said, well, all the detectives are gone, come back tomorrow.
Wow.
And
So you feel, in a way, re-victimized.
I felt that way, but
I hear that a
I
lot as
realized, I began to realize that that was affecting my attitude. And so there's one of my favorite saying that bitterness destroys the vessel in which it's stored rather than the person on which it's poured. So I had to let go of that bitterness.
It's great that you were able to do that.
And I had to develop an attitude of gratitude.
I love
How
it.
about you? So mixing the grief and
Yes.
justice and...
Well, the night that Jeremy was murdered, he was murdered by someone he knew for 3 weeks.
Wow.
It was a robbery. The boy was found not too far from where it happened with the money in his pocket. My 3 other boys, who were 14 and 16, were taken to the police department and interrogated in the middle of the night,
Wow.
having just witnessed their brother being shot. And I couldn't be there.
Right.
Because I wasn't present at the time. I wasn't allowed to be present. I went to every court hearing as he sat there and said, oh no, Jeremy wanted to buy this gun from me and it accidentally went off. That was his excuse.
Wow.
And my rage inside, because he was such a loving boy. Similar to you, he was a musician. He sang from his heart. And when they came down with the 21 years, I thought it would make me feel better. I actually hugged his mother in the courtroom because she was losing her son as well. Because the man that was going to come out at age 40 was not going to be that boy.
So you kind of looked at them as mother and started to connect with her on some level?
I understood.
Yeah.
You know, just like I thought that my son was perfect, she thought her son was perfect.
Wow.
Finding out they did dangerous things that we had no control over,
Right.
we had to come with terms.
And she had a loss. It was different than yours. But
Yes.
she, like
Still
you
a
said,
loss.
she was
It
going
was
to
still
put
a
him
loss.
in jail for a long time.
You know, Heidi, so many people, because we deal with so many different people and different types of losses. And anger is always one of those big things.
I was just thinking that, Alan.
And
I was just thinking that.
I never believe in like comparing losses.
Yeah.
But I even think of the anger that I had because my daughter wasn't wearing a seatbelt and because she was driving in a car that the people didn't take care of, all these things. Can you talk a little bit about, and you touched on it a little earlier, but how deep you got into anger?
I like that
and
question.
I mean, did you snap your fingers and it went away, or the
No,
process?
it didn't. It was a process.
Yeah.
I
Talk a
think
little bit about
one of the things that I realized for me, you know, I suffered from self-pity, and I just felt so sorry for myself. I'd lost my only child. He was my everything, and he was my purpose in life. I lost my purpose in life, and I realized that I was just miserable. I mean, all I could do was I didn't want to get out of bed. I just kept saying, Lord, take me home. I'm ready to come home. And I realized one day, I just thought, this is ridiculous. I don't know at what point it was, but I thought, I have got to get out of this self-pity mode. And I started looking at all the things I had that, you know, I'm so grateful that my son, they took a bunch of things, which wasn't important. But I'm thankful that he wasn't in a nursing home, you know, I'm thankful that they said he was shot in the back of the head, that he didn't have to suffer. So, you know, if you develop an attitude of gratitude.
So you looked at what you were thankful for.
I looked
Did he
at what I
serve
was thankful.
in the Coast Guard for 4 years?
He was in the Coast Guard, and he was 50 years old, and the last thing he said to me was, "Love you, Mom." I said, "Love you too, Russ." So I'm so grateful for those things. And I realized that I needed a purpose in life.
Yeah.
I had no purpose. And if really, if you have a purpose in life, you need to, it gives you something to get out of bed for.
I agree.
I think that's true.
And I'm thinking, how did you both, what was your purpose, and how did you go on to find hope and get a purpose after your son died?
You know, I did want to mention when you talked about anger.
Yes.
Not only did I find that I was angry at him for shooting my son, I was angry at the judicial system.
Yes.
I was angry at the hospital because he was in there and they had to come out and tell me that he had died. And I don't know whether he died before he got there or after, but I was very angry. You're supposed to save people.
Right.
The hardest person I was angry with was myself. When he asked me if he could go out that night, why didn't I say no? Why didn't I tell them they couldn't go out?
And oftentimes parents want to believe that they have control over things when they don't.
Yes, and I wrestled with
And
that.
how did you? So what catapulted you to come to where you?
I started writing letters to heaven, to Jeremy, on my computer in my room. I would sit there, I'd write, "Dear Jeremy, this is what happened today. This is what your brothers did. We had a service for you. We celebrated your life."
Wow.
I would play those songs that 100 times I hollered at him to turn down because the bass was so loud.
Yeah.
But I would play those songs through the speakers of my computer. I took those writings and I held on to them for the longest time. But a friend of mine lost her child as well. So I printed them out. I took them to her. She told me how much it helped her.
Wow.
She told her that she was feeling things that I mentioned that she thought she shouldn't be feeling. So that by helping her, it helped me. And that was my first step.
Turning your grief outward to service.
Yes.
To
helped
service.
you.
And for me, it was finding a life of purpose. But at the time, I was writing the book, Turning Your Scars into Stars. And it was about forgiveness and bitterness regarding a business partner that had taken money, and also regarding my husband and his actions. And I wrote, then grief, it helped me to write my feelings. But I started working with an orphanage in Africa.
Wow.
I worked with the homeless, and I decided that I needed to help others. And I think, you know, it gave me a purpose to get out of bed in the morning. But I think writing is so important. What was interesting is I had just started the day before my son was murdered on the scars of grief.
Wow.
And I thought I knew the scars of grief. I'd lost my mom and my dad and my grandparents. I didn't know grief. You know, grief is a very complicated subject.
Yep.
And I learned really the true meaning of grief, you know, after losing my son. But I think that if you can turn your focus from yourself and feeling sorry for yourself to outward to helping others, and get your focus off of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the other thing that you both have mentioned is the writing piece. And research shows that if you've had a traumatic loss, if you can write about it, it kind of gets it out of your system. The more
It's
you
a
write
catharsis.
about it. Yes, because otherwise we all get caught in that trauma narrative. Even those of us who haven't had the murder, I'm stuck in my brother's accident. You know, and we can keep replaying the way that they died. So to figure out how to get out of that space is really important.
One of the things that I did also, and I don't know if you did this, but I started reading grief books. I just knew there was going to be an answer. I read over 50 grief books.
Wow.
And I realized there wasn't an answer. I mean, the answer was in the Bible, and the answer was in myself, and realizing that I needed to depend on the Lord for strength.
You know, it's funny, Sue, that you mentioned that, because I did the same thing. I went to the library, I went online, I wanted to find out about other parents who had lost their children, because I wanted to know that what I was feeling was okay.
Yeah. And
because I
you
thought I
don't
was
know.
going crazy.
Right.
You think you're crazy.
Yeah.
And what I found was the same thing that you did, that they all felt the same way, and that no one is spared loss and grief. And when you have a bond of a loss, your conversation begins and you heal each other. You know, I learned about, that's how the Compassionate Friends started out.
And that's how I learned, through reading it in a book.
That there were these two women who had lost their children, who didn't know each other, and through their talking, they were able to heal. And that's what I've done. I've returned back to school and learned that.
And I know both of you have been involved in the Compassionate Friends. And that's, I'm sure, helped to hear other parents saying that you're not crazy and you know, this is a normal thing you're going through.
So,
well, I have to say that, you know, on the first conference I went to, I was thinking as I was flying there, I thought, why am I going to spend time with 1,200 depressed people? I mean, I thought, can I think of something better to do and pay money to spend that? And I loved it. Absolutely. When I got there, I just said, oh,
feel like you're home.
I'm like home. And I mean, it was, even though I had never met these people, I instantly loved them. We had a bond. And everybody, from the hugging stations to meeting you and your mom.
To meeting our executive director.
I mean, it was marvelous.
Now,
and
listen, I want to cut in because I want to ask this question before we run out of time, because I always think when we do these shows that there's someone out here and maybe their child was murdered or their loved one was murdered, but maybe they died. But they can't imagine hope right now. They can't even see it. They can't even imagine the word. And I'd like you each to take, you know, what have you learned? What would you say to them if they were sitting right here with you to help them at least imagine that there's a possibility of hope?
You know, I think that I would first tell them to be gentle with themselves, to talk to people who had been through it. You think that your family and your friends are going to be sympathetic, but they don't know what to say, and that frightens them. And so you need to find people that can relate to you and journal write. I wrote those letters to heaven. It helped me. It helped me understand my feelings. It gave me hope. And by helping other people.
And when you're doing the writing like that, it's actually healing when you're writing, but it's also healing when you look back and read them again, because you think, you know, I'm not moving through this, but you can look back and go, well, you know, I'm not actually quite there.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think I would agree with you. I did write letters. Well, I wrote letters to Rusty, but I tied them on balloons, helium balloons, and sent them up. And I think that for me, just helping others helped me with the hope. And of course, my hope, I'll be honest, my hope is in the Lord. I'm, you know, I have a relationship with Him, and He has been my hope. And family and friends, I don't have any family now left, but my friends, you know, they're there, but then they disappear. And so I've learned that when I'm weak, the Lord's strong. And for me, that has helped me, and writing has helped me. And I just think, again, before I get out of bed every morning, I thank the Lord for at least 3 things.
I like that.
And I think if I can think of all the things I have going, and all, you know, I'm going to be 80.
Wow, so
in April.
You have a fabulous life.
You know, I'm not on any medication.
And you travel all over.
And I travel all over the world, and we have so much to be grateful for. I think we need to be grateful for what we have. And we just need to, you know, hope is something that if you have purpose, you have hope.
Well, thank you. We could talk for a long time with you two, because you have a lot to offer.
Do you want to say one last thing?
I want to say one last thing. When I first went to the Compassionate Friends, a woman told me it had been 20 years. And I thought, well, this can't be a good organization if she's still going 20 years later. Now, I am a 20-year surviving mother, and I found out her purpose was what mine is now, to help those new people find hope and know that life will be different down the road.
You're so rewarded by helping others. I mean, the reward comes back to you.
You two certainly do that.
Yeah, thank you
very
both
much.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to go sing, get ready to sing a song. This was a great show.
It was fabulous.
Time went by fast.
Yes,
but
Mary Jane and Sue definitely talked the talk and they walked the walk.
And I'm going to sing Thanks for the Little While.
Oh, what a perfect song right now. Okay, well, thank you for watching. This is Dr. Heidi Horsley at the Open to Hope Foundation. And if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. Thank you.
Well, I cursed God and I cursed fate. I told everyone I couldn't wait till I could go. It turned me inside out and upside down. I could barely breathe or get around. It hurt me so. It took some time, but one day I knew I'd spend the rest of my life telling the world about you. Thanks for the hugs and all the kisses and your sweet laughter everybody misses. Thanks for the joy and the memories. I still cry. Believe me. But then again I have to smile. Thanks for the little while. Well, I have learned it's up to me to give you a voice for the world to see. So that's what I do. Your love has been my guiding light, so I hold on to it tight. It helps me through. But I had to let my anger go so I could let all my love for you show. Thanks for the hugs and all the kisses and your sweet laughter everybody misses. Thanks for the joy and the memories. I still cry, 'cause it ain't easy. But then again I have to smile. Thanks for the little while. I had so much more love to give. You had so much more life to live. And in my dreams, that's just how it would be. Our story wasn't long enough, but every page was filled with love. And you will always be a part of me. So I won't let tomorrow take away all the beauty we shared yesterday. Thanks for the hugs and your sweet kisses. There's so much about you everybody misses. Thanks for the joy and the memories. I'll always cry. Believe me. But then again I have to smile. Thanks for the little while. But then again I have to smile. Oh yes I do. Thank you for the little while. Should we do it, buddy? I will miss you kids.